The city of New York is made up of 5 boroughs total. At least 4 of the 5 boroughs have been pretty commonly represented in popular media. Manhattan is world famous, Brooklyn and the Bronx have a lot of stuff set there, and even Queens got their time to shine thanks to Run DMC and Kevin James. But the borough of Staten Island is pretty much the forgotten part of New York City. It's fairly quiet, mostly residential, definitely doesn't have as much flashy stuff as the other parts of the city. I've mentioned before how Rockstar apparently never had plans to include this borough in GTA 4, and a few reasons were given, the main one being that they apparently just didn't find it all that interesting. And because that early map concept from around 2004 didn't even feature the borough, it's easy to guess that they probably never planned on including it from the start. But according to the website of the game's lead artist, Nick Taylor, they actually did plan on including it at some point. It must have been around the time that the plan for the map itself had been finalized as being just the New York City area instead of the entire tri-state. And evidently, when they decided to do that, it turns out they might have been doing Staten Island along with it. And they might have even gotten far enough with the design for it that buildings for this lost borough were even being modeled. Now, I want to mention beforehand that none of this is my own personal discovery. I'm not here to take credit for something I didn't find myself. Let's get to Nick Taylor's website first, though. He mentioned that the map was split into 3 sections that the designers would work on in groups. One section was Manhattan and the Bronx, another was Brooklyn and Queens, and then he said that the third was New Jersey and Staten Island. He said that he worked mainly on Brooklyn and Queens to start with. Then he was assigned the Bronx, and after that they gave him Staten Island to work on before the decision was made to just cut the area entirely. It doesn't seem like he worked on it for too long either, so it might have been introduced a little bit later in the map design process and then cut shortly after. Now, another artist who worked on the game, Andrew Sousay, posted a bunch of wireframe shots of the game. Universe Twisters on GTA forums put a link to these and noticed that one of these features a building that doesn't seem to be in the game. It's called the Paramount Theater. And Kaji, another GTA forums user, pointed out that these wireframe shots are most likely from the in-game Staten Island that was being worked on, because it turns out that this is a set of buildings that exists there in real life. That was discovered by Pariah87. He found that these are located on Bay Street in the neighborhood of Stapleton. I guess that must have been one area they were planning on recreating. Funny thing, there's even a Grove Street in Stapleton. And by the way, this block still exists in the game, except now it's in Alderney. And according to another reply by Donitz, they redesigned the theater building to be based less on the former Paramount Theater and more on a movie theater that's in Tenafly, New Jersey. But the buildings next to it are still based on the ones in Staten Island. It's just that they're not very noticeable, being that they're not famous landmarks of that borough or anything. You can kind of tell it wasn't really made for this spot to begin with either. There's a sidewalk instead of lampposts facing an empty lot. It looks like it should be facing a street, but when the game was in development, whatever area it was in to begin with, that's exactly what it was facing. And that's not the only spot that's left in the game that was originally designed for this other borough either. Back in 2020, Top Thief Games on GTA forums showed that there are multiple buildings in Alderney that were designed after ones in Staten Island. Aside from Stapleton, it looks like St. George and Tompkinsville were 2 other neighborhoods that were probably being looked at or scouted at some point, going by the buildings they designed at least, because they're all located in those neighborhoods in real life. My guess is that when they thought that they were going to include this borough, they might have had a rough idea of what neighborhoods they were going to feature, and then they got to work on creating the models and textures for them, and then the area ended up getting cut. But rather than ditching the stuff they already worked on, they just incorporated these assets into the New Jersey part of the map. They probably figured it would be the easiest one to transition them to. Design-wise, it probably would have looked similar to the northern part of Alderney. And you can kind of tell where some of these buildings came from through their file names, too. Because the file names of a lot of buildings have the abbreviations for the real-life area that they belong to. Buildings in Algonquin have the label MH or Manhattan, for Manhattan, obviously. Brokers buildings are BK for Brooklyn, Alderney has NJ for New Jersey, but some of the NJ files also have the SI abbreviation, and the ones with that abbreviation are all designed after buildings on Staten Island. Now, a few of the NJ files don't have SI in the file name, but they're still from Staten Island as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if there were actually a few more assets in the game that were originally being made for the 5th borough that wound up just being on other parts of the map instead. And that's basically it as far as what we know. But what we don't know is how big this area would have been compared to the others, as well as what other neighborhoods they would have featured aside from Stapleton, St. George, and Tompkinsville. and also where it would have even been placed on the map. That's kind of another oddity. In real life, Staten Island is connected to Brooklyn via the Verrazano Bridge, and then to New Jersey by 3 different bridges. There's also the Staten Island Ferry that makes trips to Whitehall Terminal in Manhattan. I'm thinking the area was going to be either connected to Alderney only, or the entire map layout might have still been a little different when it was being made, because there's nowhere in Broker that looks like it could have fit another bridge going west or southwest. I think it definitely would have been closer to Alderney, though, since Nick Taylor mentioned that the areas were all grouped together in pairs when they were being worked on. Broker and Dukes, Algonquin and Bohan, and then Alderney would have been paired with their Staten Island equivalent. So what could they have done with this area that could have been unique, aside from featuring just 3 random neighborhoods? I think it would have been cool if they used this borough as an opportunity to have a little bit more green space on the map. In real life, it's the one part of New York City that actually has the most amount of undeveloped land. It feels almost rural in some spots. This could have been like the countryside for the game that people felt that it lacked. And besides being more woodsy, it was also home to the Fresh Kills landfill, which was in use from 1948 to 2001. Most of New York City's trash went there. Within 10 years of it opening, it was the largest landfill in the world. It got so big that by the 80s, debris from the landfill was actually coming out of it and washing up on beaches in New Jersey and Long Island, and the city of New York was forced to pay $1 million in damages and cleanup for this. Then it was closed in March of 2001, but unfortunately had to be reopened again temporarily later that year in order to accommodate the rubble from the World Trade Center. And since 2008, the entire landfill is being capped and redeveloped as a park. It's being done in phases, parts of it are open right now, but the entire thing's not expected to be completed until at least 2035. And when it's finished, it's going to be the second biggest park in New York City. And by the way, the biggest park is Pelham Bay Park in the Bronx, not Central Park. A lot of people probably think it is, though. But if you've ever been to Central Park and you know how huge it is, Fresh Kills Park is going to be about 3 times the size of Central Park. And now imagine that area 30 years ago as a landfill and not a park. Kind of gives you an idea of how grossly large it was. And it sort of makes you understand why Staten Island had such a bad reputation for having a bad smell all those years. So yeah, if this borough ended up in GTA 4, I think they definitely would have included the landfill. You might also be wondering, if they had actually included this area, how would it have fit into the story? Well, considering that they only write the story after the maps are designed, it's impossible to guess why Nico would have had a reason to even go there, aside from seeing the home of the Wu-Tang Clan and Pete Davidson. But when you look at the type of crime that Staten Island was associated with in real life, it was the home of several infamous New York mobsters, including Sammy the Bull Gravano, Thomas Bilotti, and Paul Castellano. I'm sure the Italian Mafia would have been featured heavily in this part of the story if they had included it. But since they probably never got around to writing any plot points here, we'll probably never really know what they could have done. Alright, anyway, that's enough of rambling about real-life crime. What are your thoughts on Staten Island almost being in GTA 4? Would you have liked seeing it in the game, or do you think they made the right choice in cutting it? Oh, and any Staten Islanders watching this right now? Are you disappointed that your borough never made it in the game? Let me know your thoughts, and thank you for watching.